If you were watching the Azerbaijan Grand Prix last weekend, then you might have noticed Lewis Hamilton struggling to get out of the car after the race. It wasn't from old age or mental fatigue, but instead, one of the ongoing effects of porpoising. So, just how bad is the effect on drivers? Which drivers suffered nerve damage from the bouncing? And why does Christian Horner think that Lewis Hamilton is faking it? A bumpy start. First off, what the hell is porpoising? Well, if you've been watching Formula 1 this season, you should have a pretty good idea. But here's a short recap anyway. This year's regulations have been a revolution for the cars. A new front wing, rear wing, and bigger wheels were all brought in to help create closer and more exciting racing. Plus, a lot of the restrictions for the floor design were removed, which meant that teams could generate downforce from the bottom of the car. This is known as ground effect. It's been an exciting new feature for engineers to maximize the downforce of the car, but it's brought with it some huge problems. The biggest of those is porpoising, where the wind tunnels speeding underneath the car are interrupted. This aerostalling causes the car to bob up and down and has some big downsides. It limits the top speed, downforce, and overall performance of the car. But it's not just the engineers who are struggling. The drivers inside the car are taking the hardest hit out of anyone. At times, it's looked like their entire bodies are bouncing up and down. It's a miracle that no one has been ejected from their seat yet. Can you imagine trying to do your job while your head is bouncing around like that? It's hard to imagine, but there are some good reasons why the FIA hasn't intervened yet and put a stop to it. Baku breaking point. There have been complaints coming from the drivers since the beginning of the season. After the Australian Grand Prix, Haas driver Kevin Magnussen said that he was suffering from nerve pain in his arm and jaw. His physiotherapist said that his spinal cord was pushing on his nerves because the car was bouncing so rapidly. But Kevin has said that since Australia, the team had done enough to reduce the porpoising of the car. Unfortunately, that can't be said for all teams. In Azerbaijan, Mercedes were still suffering extreme bouncing, and it's been tough for Lewis Hamilton to handle. Lewis has already had a disastrous season so far. He's trailing his new teammate in the standings and is almost 100 points away from the leader, Max Verstappen. Any hopes of a historic 8th World Championship this year are all but gone. And with rumors of his retirement floating around since the start of the year, it could now be a real possibility. At the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where Hamilton managed a P4 finish after a Ferrari double retirement, he was clearly hurting. After getting out of the car, he said, "I cannot express the pain you experience, especially on the straight here. In the end, you're just praying for it to end." Toto Wolff later confirmed that the physical stress is so bad that it's putting Hamilton's season at risk. Wolff said that Hamilton wasn't locked in for the next race in Canada and that they would have to have a reserve driver on standby, just in case. A load of bull? But over at Red Bull, team boss Christian Horner thinks that his rivals might be playing games. He accused Mercedes of exaggerating the porpoising effects to try to bend the rules in their favor. He said that while it might be uncomfortable for Hamilton, there are solutions that could get rid of it. The problem is that Mercedes aren't willing to sacrifice that performance, and so according to Horner, they're trying to complain from a safety point of view. If it's the teams choosing performance over driver safety, then that's their decision. The Red Bull man, who doesn't think that teams like them, who have figured out the problem, should be penalized too. His team have managed to get on top of their bouncing, and have presumably spent quite a bit of money to do it. This is mainly thanks to a sophisticated floor design, suspension, and strong ride control that keep the Red Bull stable through corners and on the straights. Adrian Newey and his team have done it again. That's why Red Bull aren't big fans of making any changes to the regulations at this point. After all, they are on top of the Constructors and Drivers' Championships. What's to complain about? That's why they probably voted against making any changes when the FIA held a meeting recently. The voters are not publicly known, but judging by Horner's comments and the team's position, it's not too hard to guess. Trouble at the top. Horner may be right about Mercedes trying to level the playing field, but what about Ferrari? The prancing horses have also been complaining about the problem, while having the fastest car on the grid. Charles Leclerc has won 6 pole positions so far this season, with the latest coming in Azerbaijan. But even there, you can still see the issue of porpoising. Going through the corners and when picking up speed, Leclerc's head shakes around a lot in the cockpit. But it doesn't seem to be much of a problem for him. During the Australian Grand Prix, the Monegasque said, "I don't know why, but I'm not very sensitive to it. it doesn't bother me too much in terms of performance. Meanwhile, other drivers have been clear that porpoising threatens much more than the performance of the car. Leclerc's teammate, Carlos Sainz, said that he's worried about his long-term health. Back in May, Sainz said that he could already feel the effects of porpoising on his body and that the FIA should think about changing the regulations. At the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix, the porpoising of the Ferrari was on full display, and it's not hard to see what he was complaining about. Sainz understands that Formula 1 wants to make the racing as exciting as possible, but thinks that driver safety should be the #1 priority. He's asked the governing body to listen to the drivers instead of the team's principles. This could be shaping up to be a debate that pits drivers against their management. And now George Russell, who's the director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, has asked the FIA to investigate it. Quick fix. When the issue of porpoising was first revealed during preseason testing, there was actually a pretty simple fix. If the regulations lifted the minimum height of the car, then the bouncing would disappear. That's why the FIA proposed this solution early on, but the teams voted against it. They had already come too far with their designs to start from scratch again. Plus, if any constructor was able to solve the issue, they would be miles ahead of their rivals. At this point in the season, you would think that most teams had found a solution, but it hasn't been so simple to strike a balance between optimal performance and limited porpoising. But now the bouncing might be having an impact on how drivers perform. Hamilton has admitted that during the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, the bouncing was so bad that at times he had to take his foot off the pedal during the straights. He was actually scared of losing control. That's not something you want to hear from a racing driver. For Hamilton, it's the first time in his career that he has been worried about that. He said it was a very strange experience, and for the last 10 laps, he was just trying to motivate himself to cross the finish line. Hamilton is the second oldest driver on the grid, but that's not the issue. His 24-year-old teammate, George Russell, said that he also suffered chest and back pains during the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in April. He said, "I don't know what the future holds for this era of cars, but I don't think it's right to run like this for the next 4 years, or whatever we've got." Deep silver water. But maybe Lewis was feeling his age the next day. When he woke up after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, his body was still hurting. He said that he had some trouble sleeping and needed some acupuncture to recover from his bumpy ride in Baku. But nothing can keep his spirits down. In an Instagram after the weekend, Hamilton admitted that his back was a little sore, but said that he was feeling positive about the direction of the team. And he's going to need all of the positivity he can get. This year, Mercedes have never looked like the team that they were last year. Right now, that responsibility falls on their technical director, Mike Elliott. Since the start of the year, commentators and rivals have warned anyone ruling out Mercedes from the championship. They have said that if Mercedes can control their bouncing, they will unlock the car's power and be right back in the race. In Spain, it looked like they finally understood the problem, and it showed when George Russell defended his lead against Max Verstappen. But since then, it's been the same old issues. Mike Elliott and his team still haven't found out the key. Toto Wolff said that they know the root cause of their problems, but don't have all the answers yet. They're still experimenting with different parts and collecting data. As for the 2022 World Championship, it might be too little too late. And the way things are going, it might be too late for Hamilton's elusive 8th championship too. Do you think that Hamilton is going to retire before the end of the season? And what do you think about porpoising? Should the FIA intervene? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.